T-minus 1 hour, 5 minutes, 40 seconds and counting. We're now bringing you a closer view of the Falcon Heavy rocket, which, of course, the view from our location 3 miles away is obscured by the fog bank here at Kennedy Space Center, but these views come from cameras at the launch pad at Pad 39A, showing the Falcon Heavy vertical with some blue sky in the background. I've mentioned that it is somewhat clear overhead the spaceport, but there is a low fog layer just above the surface here. You can see some of that gray fog and cloud in the distance from this view. This view coming, looking north from a camera just to the south of Pad 39A. You can see the strong back obstructing the center core and the second stage. That strong back, of course, will retract when the Falcon Heavy begins its climb off the pad. Liftoff remains set for 9:41 a.m. Eastern Time, 13:41 UTC.
Attention operators on countdown, 58.66, propellant load and launch, go, no-go poll is open at 1.160.
Now T-minus 55 minutes, 17 seconds. The latest update we've heard from SpaceX Launch Control is that their pre-propellant load poll is open. This is the poll of the launch team to verify that all stations are ready to begin loading kerosene and liquid oxygen propellants into the Falcon Heavy rocket on pad 39A, which you're looking at live in this view from Kennedy Space Center. That propellant loading is due to begin in less than 5 minutes time at T-minus 50 minutes. Here's our view from the Kennedy Space Center press site. As you can see, the fog has not lifted. If anything, it has gotten a little bit worse in the last few minutes. We can see the countdown clock here at KSC, T-minus 54 minutes, 17 seconds and counting. But we are getting some views from the launch pad now. We're bringing those to you live. Now 4 minutes until the expected start time for propellant load. If you're just joining us, welcome to our live coverage for the launch of SpaceX's fourth Falcon Heavy rocket. The first Falcon Heavy launch since June of 2019. And the first fully operational national security launch to use the Falcon Heavy, which is the world's most powerful operational launch vehicle. The Falcon Heavy will soon be eclipsed, potentially before the end of the year, by two new rockets. The Space Launch System moon rocket for NASA's Artemis moon program and SpaceX's own next generation Starship and Super Heavy rocket, both of which are more powerful and more capable than the Falcon Heavy.
Joint SpaceX and Space Force team.
But the Falcon Heavy now has had the mantle for 4 years
today. Please stand by for
as the most powerful operational rocket.
For non-urgent no-go conditions, brief the CE or LD, and they will approve aborting the countdown. For urgent issues affecting the safety of the operation, operators shall call hold on countdown net. Launch control will abort the launch auto sequence and proceed into launch abort. At T-minus 10 seconds, launch control will be hands-off, relying on automated abort criteria for the remainder of the count. Falcon Heavy tanks are venting for propellant load.
You're now listening to some audio from the launch pad as SpaceX begins preparations to load propellants into the Falcon Heavy. This is a vent from the rocket or from a ground system out at the pad. We're bringing you natural audio from Pad 39A as SpaceX is now 51 minutes away from the start of propellant loading. You can see some fog now moving over the rocket out at the launch complex. We did hear a call a couple of minutes ago that SpaceX's launch team is go to start fueling the Falcon Heavy with kerosene fuel into the 3 first stage booster cores you see there at T-minus 50 minutes. So again, this audio you're hearing is normal. This is a pre-fueling vent out at Pad 39A.
Launch auto sequence has started.
And now the launch auto sequence has started, and right on cue, that vent has been terminated out at the pad as kerosene fuel begins flowing into the Falcon Heavy's 3 first stage booster cores. This will be followed by a loading of cryogenic liquid oxygen onto the first stage booster cores at T-minus 45 minutes. Again, you're listening to live audio from Launch Complex 39A, some venting out of the pad as propellants are being loaded into the Falcon Heavy rocket now for liftoff at 9:41 a.m. Eastern Time.
Stage 1 PY and NY LOX load has begun.
Liquid oxygen is now flowing into the first stage boosters out at pad 39A. In total, about 3 million pounds of propellants will be loaded into the Falcon Heavy rocket to prepare it for liftoff this morning. Upper stage propellant loading will get underway later in the countdown. That will start at T-minus 35 minutes. As you can see, it's still quite foggy here at Kennedy Space Center. You can see some of the news photographers and reporters gathered on the press site lawn. This is a location about 3 miles from the Falcon Heavy launch pad. But we are getting views from pad 39A from cameras, SpaceX cameras out at the launch complex, showing the Falcon Heavy also somewhat shrouded in fog, awaiting liftoff at 9:41 a.m. Eastern Time, 13:41 UTC. Right now, propellants, kerosene, and liquid oxygen are being loaded into the 3 first stage booster cores. These sounds you're hearing, as I've mentioned before, are normal during propellant loading. You're hearing the sounds of vents from the rocket and from the ground infrastructure out at pad 39A as SpaceX loads about 3 million pounds of fuel and oxidizer into the launch vehicle. The team overseeing this countdown operation is located in firing room 4 of the Launch Control Center here at Kennedy Space Center. That's just across the road from where I'm reporting live, next to the vehicle assembly building. You're now seeing some vapors and condensation begin to build up around the Falcon Heavy as this super cold liquid oxygen flows into the vehicle. Now approaching T-minus 41 minutes. Now T-minus 40 minutes and counting. Now T-minus 37 minutes and counting. The Falcon Heavy rocket, if you're not familiar with it, is the world's most powerful operational launch vehicle. It's made by combining 3 Falcon 9 booster cores together. And this view on the left is a SpaceX photo taken inside the integration hangar just south of Pad 39A, where SpaceX teams integrated the 3 first stage booster cores together. Each of those boosters has 9 Merlin 1D engines for a total of 27 Merlin engines that will be firing at liftoff to produce 5.1 million pounds of thrust. The Falcon Heavy has the capability to haul a cargo of up to 140,000 pounds, or about 64 metric tons, into low Earth orbit. That assumes that SpaceX does not recover the boosters. But for today's mission, the 2 side boosters that you see here on each side of the core will be recovered back at landing zones 1 and 2 at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. Landing back at landing zones 1 and 2 is set for about 8 minutes after liftoff. The core stage, which will burn longer than the 2 side boosters, will be expended. It will be jettisoned from the upper stage. It will fall into the Atlantic Ocean, and SpaceX will not recover it. It will dedicate all of its propellant to the task of sending the Space Force payload into orbit on this USSF-44 mission. These photos also taken by SpaceX's photographer. On the upper right, you see the rollout of the Falcon Heavy to Pad 39A yesterday, and 2 other views taken overnight after the Falcon Heavy was lifted vertical in preparation for this morning's countdown.
Stage 2 RP1 load has started.
And that call from SpaceX Launch Control confirms that the second stage RP1, or kerosene fuel tank, is now being loaded. RP1 stands for Rocket Propellant 1. It's a highly refined rocket-grade variant of kerosene that is used on both stages, or actually all three boosters on the Falcon Heavy, as well as the upper stage of the Falcon Heavy to feed the Merlin engines on this vehicle. The oxidizer is liquid oxygen. Now, liquid oxygen is already flowing into the three first stage booster cores. Liquid oxygen will start loading into the second stage at T-minus 18 minutes. Again, if you're just joining us, you're looking at the Falcon Heavy rocket shrouded in a veil of fog at pad 39A, and the periodic noises you're hearing on our stream actually come from audio at the launch pad. So you're hearing noises from the Falcon Heavy and from the ground systems as SpaceX steps through this morning's countdown, 31 minutes until liftoff. If you haven't had a chance to do so, please hit the like button on our YouTube stream. That helps us gain a larger audience for our coverage. We want to bring you this Falcon Heavy launch and bring it to as many people as possible. So if you hit the like button here on our YouTube stream, that really would help us out. SpaceX's countdown clock has just passed T-minus 30 minutes. Today's launch of the Falcon Heavy will mark the 4th flight for SpaceX's heavy lift rocket. Here's a look back at the previous 3 missions. The demo mission for the Falcon Heavy, the inaugural test flight of this vehicle, was back on February the 6th of 2018. That launched at 3:45 p.m. Eastern from this same launch pad, carrying one of Elon Musk's Tesla Roadsters onto an Earth escape trajectory. This was, again, a demonstration flight for without flying a customer payload. So SpaceX put this modified Tesla on top of the rocket with what they called Starman, and basically a test dummy in a spacesuit in the driver's seat of that vehicle. An iconic photo there from an onboard camera looking back at the crescent Earth in the background after launching into deep space on the Falcon Heavy. 2 more Falcon Heavy rockets launched in 2019, one in April, one in June of that year. First for Arabsat, Saudi Arabian communications satellite, on that mission on April 11th, 2019. And then on June the 25th of that year, the Space Test Program 2 mission launched. That was a night launch from Kennedy Space Center, carrying 24 small satellites into different orbital altitudes and different inclinations for NASA and the U.S. military and NOAA. And that mission, again, was the most recent Falcon Heavy launch nearly 3.5 years ago. This mission launching today is USSF-44 for the U.S. Space Force. It's been delayed about 2 years due to payload issues with spacecraft that are on board this mission. And several other Falcon Heavy launches have also been delayed due to payload readiness issues over the past couple of years. But if this mission gets off the ground today successfully, SpaceX plans as many as 6, or actually 5 more after today, 5 more Falcon Heavy launches over the next year or so from Kennedy Space Center. Here's a look at the countdown timeline this morning. We've already passed a few of these milestones with the start of kerosene loading on the first stage boosters and liquid oxygen loading on the first stage boosters at T-minus 50 minutes and 45 minutes. We also heard the call at T-minus 35 minutes that kerosene or RP-1 fuel was being loaded onto the second stage of the Falcon Heavy. Liquid oxygen loading onto the second stage will begin at T-minus 18 minutes 30 seconds, about 5 minutes from now. The second stage on today's mission will actually perform several burns on its way to geosynchronous orbit with the U.S. Space Force's 2 main payloads on this mission. Those burns will be separated by a coast of about 6 hours, so this will be the longest duration SpaceX mission to date from the time of liftoff until payload separation. At T-minus 7 minutes, the 27 Merlin engines on the first stage boosters will begin their chill down process. At 4.5 minutes, we should see the strong back retract about 1.5 degrees from the Falcon Heavy rocket. And then in the last 2 minutes of the countdown, we'll hear a call from SpaceX Launch Control that the rocket is fully loaded, fully fueled with kerosene and liquid oxygen. And at T-minus 1 minute, the onboard computer on the Falcon Heavy will take command of the countdown. SpaceX's launch director will verify their go for launch at 45 seconds. That'll be followed by pressurization, closing of vent valves to bring the propellant tanks on the Falcon Heavy up to flight pressures. And then at T-minus 6 minutes, the engine start command will be issued. And if the engines check out and pass their health check, the command will be given to release hold-down clamps, allowing the Falcon Heavy
strong back chill is starting
to lift off at T0. Again, if you're just joining us, we're now 21 minutes, 15 seconds from liftoff. If you haven't done so, please hit the like button on our stream. That helps us get a bigger audience for our live coverage of this Falcon Heavy launch from Kennedy Space Center. So again, please hit the like button. That really helps us out. If you want to support our coverage, you can also become a member of our Spaceflight Now YouTube channel. We have different membership tiers available for you to choose from. Depending on which level you select, you can gain access to bonus members-only video coverage, video features from our coverage here at Kennedy Space Center and at Cape Canaveral, our home base. We also cover launches and space flight activity around the world as well.
Stage 2 RP-1 load is complete.
We just heard the call at approaching T-minus 20 minutes and 30 seconds that the second stage kerosene fuel tank is fully loaded. That will be followed in about 2 minutes' time by the start of liquid oxygen loading on the second stage of the Falcon Heavy. Also, you can subscribe to our YouTube channel and get alerts every time we're going live, so you'll never miss a live stream from Spaceflight Now if you subscribe to our YouTube channel. T-minus 20 minutes and counting.
Stage 2 LOX load has started.
Now inside of 18 minutes until launch. This map shows the approximate trajectory for the Falcon Heavy rocket as it heads east over the Atlantic Ocean. This red line shows the flight path that the Falcon Heavy will take after lifting off from Launch Complex 39A, which we have labeled here on this map. This due east trajectory is necessary to place the two main payloads for the U.S. Space Force that are on this mission into a geosynchronous orbit about 22,000 miles or 36,000 kilometers over the equator. So it's a low inclination equatorial orbit that's targeted on this mission today. And to reach that orbit, the Falcon Heavy will have to head due east from Kennedy Space Center. The two side boosters on this mission will be returning to a landing at landing zones 1 and 2, about 9 miles or 15 kilometers south of Pad 39A. This infographic from SpaceX shows some of the key flight events on this mission. See the initial launch and ascent from Pad 39A. The two side boosters will be jettisoned about 2.5 minutes into the flight. They'll perform boost back burns to essentially reverse course and head back toward Cape Canaveral for landing. A nearly simultaneous landings of these two boosters on adjacent landing pads expected about 8 minutes after liftoff. Those two boosters, of course, will deploy grid fins and perform braking burns on their way back to Earth. The core stage, meanwhile, will burn about 1.5 minutes longer. It'll actually initially launch in a partial thrust mode, throttled back to conserve fuel. After those two side boosters jettison, it'll throttle up and continue the climb to space with this USSF-44 mission. The core stage will be jettisoned about 4 minutes into the flight and will be crashing into the Atlantic Ocean. It won't be recovered on this mission. And the infographic here from SpaceX continues with the separation of the payload fairing, expected about 4 minutes, 18 seconds after launch. And then the upper stage will actually perform multiple burns. Those burns will occur without live coverage in secret under orders from the U.S. Space Force due to the classified nature of this mission. And ultimately, the payloads will be deployed about 6 hours after launch into that geosynchronous orbit. The map here that we've made of the Cape Canaveral and Kennedy Space Center area shows the labels of Launch Complex 39A. That's the departure point for today's mission. And we've also labeled the location of landing zones 1 and 2 so you can get a feel for where the launch is occurring and where the two side boosters will be landing 8 minutes and 11 seconds after liftoff. SpaceX's countdown is now at T-minus 15 minutes and counting.
Falcon Heavy over 4 years ago. We sent Starman on a journey to space in a Tesla Roadster. After that demonstration mission in 2018, we launched 2 operational missions the following year with the Arabsat 6A and STP-2 payloads. Today's mission will be SpaceX's 3rd overall operational Falcon Heavy mission and our 2nd launching a U.S. government satellite, first being STP-2. USS F-44 will launch into a geosynchronous Earth orbit from Launch Complex 39A in Florida, which, as you can kind of see there through the fog on your screen. At our customer's request, we will not be showing views of the payload, so we'll be ending our webcast just after our Falcon 9 side boosters make their way back to land on LZ-1 and LZ-2, a little past the T+8 minute mark into flight. Now, as I mentioned before, it is a little foggy there at pad 39A. However, we promise that everything is still go for liftoff on time. The range and everything is still looking green. Everything's still looking good with our countdown as we approach the T-minus 13 minute mark. We have a 90% chance, 90% favorability in terms of our weather conditions. So even though it is a little foggy, we're still good to go. Now, if for some reason we don't get to launch today, we do have a backup opportunity tomorrow at 9:37 a.m. Eastern Time. So we're now just under T-minus 13 minutes and counting. Let's take a closer look at the Falcon Heavy vehicle that will deliver the USS F-44 payload to its intended orbit. Falcon Heavy is essentially 3 Falcon 9 rockets strapped together, meaning it can carry much larger payloads not only to Earth orbit, but to the Moon and Mars as well. Like the Falcon 9, Falcon Heavy is a 2-stage launch vehicle. The big difference is that the Falcon Heavy first stage is comprised of 3 cores, and Falcon 9 only has 1. Falcon Heavy has 28 engines, making it the world's most powerful operating
internal power.
Their call out indicating that the spacecraft is now on internal power. So with the 28 engines, this makes Falcon Heavy the world's most powerful operational rocket by a factor of 2. Each of these cores has 9 M1D engines, making for a total of 27 engines across all 3 boosters, as you see there in that shot. The 28th engine is a Merlin vacuum engine on the second stage, and that's what will power the payload to its final targeted orbit. Altogether, the Merlin 1D engines at the base of Falcon Heavy produce 5 million pounds of thrust, equal to 18 747s at takeoff. In fact, the engines produce so much power that we don't even run them at full thrust all at once. We do that after liftoff. Now, after liftoff, at about 2.5 minutes into flight, those 2 side boosters will separate from the center core and come back to Earth for simultaneous landings at Landing Zone 1 and Landing Zone 2, which we have a beautiful view there on your screen. If successfully recovered, the side boosters will be refurbished and used in a future national security space launch. Upon side booster separation, the center core will keep firing for about 90 seconds before shutting down its engines, then perform a standard stage separation from the second stage. We will not be attempting to land our center core today, as the mission requires more performance, meaning in order to get our payload where it needs to go for today's mission, the center core will burn the fuel that we would typically use for recovery. For those of you looking closely, even though it is a little foggy, that's why you don't see any landing legs or grid fins on the center core. We'll probably get a better view of that after liftoff. Now, moving up to the second stage, once the first stage and second stage separate, it will propel our payload to its intended orbit. At our customer's request, we will not be showing views of stage 2, so immediately after the Merlin vacuum engine on the second stage fires up, we'll be directing all of our attention to the landing of our side boosters. Now, above the second stage is where our payload is safely enclosed inside the fairing. The fairing protects the payload from aerothermal loads, heating, and contamination during ascent. Once we reach the vacuum of space, we will jettison the fairing as the second stage continues its journey to orbit. We will be attempting to recover the fairing halves today with our recovery vessel, Doug. As I mentioned earlier, today's launch is USS F-44, and that's for the national security. It's a national security space launch mission for the United States Space Force. Now let's learn a little bit more from our customer about the mission at hand.
We depend on space every day to support our way of life, our supply chain, financial systems, weather tracking, and power grids, as well as air, land, and maritime infrastructure. Our U.S. military is the strongest and best equipped force in the world. In the heavily contested space domain, Space Systems Command leads a team of roughly 15,000 guardians, airmen, civilians, and contractors. Headquartered in El Segundo, California, Our unbeatable team operates from multiple locations across the U.S. and includes 2 space launch deltas, SLD-45 at Patrick Space Force Base and SLD-30 at Vandenberg Space Force Base. Through unity of effort across the space acquisition enterprise, Space Systems Command delivers to warfighters integrated and resilient space capabilities through 5 program executive offices. Assured access to space procures launch services and delivers on-orbit capabilities faster and more frequently than ever before, while sustaining ranges for the United States Space Force and commercial partners. Battle Management Command, Control, and Communication delivers tactical and operational command and control capabilities to warfighters, facilitating timely and quality battle space decisions for the joint all-domain fight. Space domain awareness and combat power maximizes the full characterization of space using a wide range of multi-domain assets by rapidly detecting potential and real threats to our nation and allies, which enables decisive action in the space domain. Communications and positioning, navigation, and timing ensures the delivery of resilient capabilities across the acquisition lifecycle, from prototypes to systems on the production line to systems our warfighters have been operating for years. Space Sensing delivers space-based battle space awareness through missile warning, tracking, environmental monitoring, and tactical intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. Our adversaries fully intend to disrupt, degrade, and destroy the U.S. and our allies' ability to access and operate in space. Not on our watch. Space Systems Command is focused on creating and sustaining resilient lethality in space through systems integration, unity of effort, and digital engineering ecosystems. At Space Systems Command, space starts here.
We're now at almost T-minus 6 minutes and 30 seconds, and the SpaceX team continues to count down for launch of our 3rd operational Falcon Heavy flight, and all systems remain go. At this point in time, fuel load is complete on the 2nd stage as well as one of the side boosters. And there we just heard the call out that the fuel load is now complete on the other side booster as well as the center core. Now, following a successful static fire last Thursday, Falcon Heavy rolled out to the pad with a payload yesterday and went vertical about 6 hours later. You can see a time lapse of that there on your screen. Before we began the webcast today, the SpaceX launch director pulled the members of the launch team and got a go for prop loading and launch, which, as I just mentioned, we're currently undergoing. We're loading propellant on all 3 first stage boosters and the 2nd stage. Now, you may be able to hear the live rocket sounds from our launch pad. The pops and hissings that you hear are from the propellant loading, as well as the launch mount and strong back that the propellant is flowing through. Falcon Heavy uses 2 propellants, a refined form of kerosene called RP1, or Rocket Propellant 1, and that's the fuel, and LOX, or liquid oxygen, for the oxidizer. An oxidizer is a type of chemical that a fuel requires in order to burn. The liquid oxygen is chilled below its boiling point so that it has a much greater amount of mass per volume. Basically, we can load more of it into the rocket. Our fuel is RP1, essentially a purified kerosene. It is safe, easily available, and has a lot of history. As a fun fact, the Saturn V first stage flown from this very pad for moon missions also used liquid oxygen and kerosene.
Falcon Heavy tanks are pressing for strong back retract.
And then we just heard the call out. We are preparing for that strong back retraction. Now, in addition to the 2 propellants I mentioned, we also use the chemical TTEB, or triethyl aluminum and triethyl borane, as an ignition source. The combustion of RP1 and LOX is what makes the rocket go up, and it's the TTEB that basically sets the match for that propellant mix.
Strong back lower has begun.
And we can see there on your screen shortly that we will begin to see that strong back begin to retract away from the fairing. In preparation for that retraction, the clamp arms around the 2nd stage opened, and that allows the strong back to recline away from the vehicle. Now, as I mentioned earlier, this is our first Falcon Heavy flight in 3 years. And a lot will happen in the first 4 minutes of flight. First, we will light the 2 side boosters, followed by the center core. Then, about 40 seconds after liftoff, we will decrease power on the 2 side boosters in preparation for max Q, after which Falcon Heavy will then throttle back.
NY LOX load is complete.
So there we heard the call out that one of these side boosters is now complete with its LOX load, fully loaded with all of its propellants. Then it looks like we can see that strong backward traction happening now.
PY LOX load is complete.
We are now fully loaded with LOX on the other side booster. So 2 minutes into flight, we will again reduce thrust on the 2 side boosters, this time to decrease forces on the rocket structure overall. The vehicle at that point in time will be much lighter, but the thrust remains constant. At 2.5 minutes into flight, we fully turn off the side boosters with the booster engine cutoff, or BECO. This pneumatic
Stage 1 LOX load is complete.
And there we heard the call out, stage 1 LOX load is complete. So at this point in time, both side boosters and the center core are now fully loaded with its liquid oxygen and RP1. Once clear of the side boosters, the center core will throttle up to full power and until the center core shuts down with main engine cutoff, or MECO, and then separate from the second stage around the 4-minute mark. From that point on, very similar to Falcon 9 mission, side boosters will be making their way back to Earth for recovery. The fairing will separate, and the second stage will take the USSF-44 payload out into space. Just as a quick reminder, at the request of our customer, we won't be showing views of the payload, so we'll be ending the webcast just after our side boosters make their way back to land at LZ1 and LZ2, and that will be a little after the T+8-minute mark into flight.
Stage 2 LOX load is complete.
So there we heard the call out, stage 2 LOX load is complete. So at this point in time, Falcon Heavy is now fully loaded with all of its propellants. As I've mentioned before in previous webcasts, launch is hard. Falcon Heavy is no exception. We're essentially counting down 3 rockets simultaneously. So our team is going to be conservative in case anything pops up in the last minutes of the countdown. In addition to the fog around the launch pad, we can see some of the white clouds there around the vehicle. Totally normal. That's just the liquid oxygen, basically
ground gas closeouts.
Vaporizing as it comes into contact with the ambient air. Now that those closeouts are complete, as we just heard that call out, we should see more of that. Next, we'll hear the call out that Falcon 9 is in startup.
Falcon Heavy is in startup.
All right, at this point in time, Falcon Heavy's onboard flight computers have taken over the launch countdown. Great view of the base of Falcon Heavy there.
MD, LD, go for launch.
LD, this is the MD. The MD is go for launch.
And there we heard the final go for launch.
T-minus 30 seconds and counting.
Let's listen in to the final count as Falcon Heavy gets ready to go to space once again.
T-minus 15 seconds and counting. T-minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0, liftoff. Vehicle is pitching downrange. M1D chamber pressure is nominal.
Headed to space. We've throttled down in preparation for max Q. Moment of peak mechanical stress on the rocket.
Falcon Heavy is supersonic.
There we just heard the call out that the vehicle is now traveling faster than the speed of sound. What a beautiful sight.
Max Q.
All right, there we just heard the call out. That is the moment of peak mechanical stress on the rocket. M1D engines throttling back up. A beautiful sight to see Falcon Heavy flying once again. Shortly we'll hear the call out for MVAC chill, indicating that the second stage is prepping the MVAC engine.
Vehicle is following a nominal trajectory.
We will flow a little bit of the super chilled liquid oxygen through the turbo pumps on that MVAC in preparation for the full flow of the super chilled propellant. Shots there of each side booster on the right-hand side of your screen. Next event will be booster engine cutoff, or BECO. That'll be followed by stage separation of side boosters, side booster boost back burn, center core main engine cutoff. We are about 10 seconds away from the booster separation.
Side core shutdown. Booster separation confirmed.
And there you can see and heard it by the incredible excitement within the crowd behind me. Successful separation of the side boosters. There we can see 3 engines on each side booster have relit for their boost back burn. At this point in time, both side boosters are returning.
All vehicles are following nominal trajectories.
Good news there, both side boosters and the center core, everything looking good. Side boosters are returning to the coast of Florida, now under the power of 3 engines. That's a view there of the center core. Coming up, 3 events happening in rapid succession. We'll have the conclusion of the side booster boost back burn, followed by main engine cutoff, as well as stage separation of that center core. As a reminder, per request of our customer, we won't be showing second stage views after second engine start 1. Additionally, our center core, or stage 1, the one you see there, is expendable today, so we are not recovering this booster.
Boost back burn shutdown. Nico. Stage separation confirmed.
There you heard the call out and saw on your screen we had side boost back burn conclusion, as well as the main engine cutoff and separation for that center core, and we heard call out of second engine start 1. At this point in time, with that call out,
Separation confirmed.
we will wrap our coverage pertaining to the second stage, keeping our focus on the
All
side
vehicles
boosters,
continue to follow nominal trajectories.
which you see there. Unfortunately, looks like
Acquisition of signal, Bermuda.
the cameras on those side boosters are a little fogged over. We heard confirmation of successful fairing separation. While second stage continues on its journey, the fairing halves will fall back to Earth, where we will attempt to recover them using our recovery vessel, Doug. As a reminder, today we'll be attempting to recover the 2 Falcon Heavy side boosters on land. You can sort of make out some cloud coverage there in the background camera. We'll bring that back to you whenever we're able. Now, in just a few minutes, the side boosters will execute an entry burn followed by a landing burn. Both burns are meant to slow the side boosters down rapidly before landing. At the time of separation, the side boosters were traveling slow enough to turn around and make their way back to land at our side-by-side landing pads. If we have successful landings today, it will mark the 150th and 151st successful landing of an orbital class rocket. As I mentioned earlier, center core is going to be expended, and we are not attempting to recover it. This allows us to utilize...
All vehicles continue to follow nominal trajectories.
Allows us to utilize all the propellant on board and deliver peak performance for the payload delivery. On the left-hand side of your screen is a live view of Hawthorne Mission Control here at SpaceX headquarters. We're about 30 seconds away from the entry burn for the 2 side boosters. They're on the top and bottom of the right-hand side of your screen. Standing by for side booster entry burn.
Booster entry burns have started.
There we heard the call out that the booster entry burn has begun.
Booster entry burn shut down.
Looks like the ice on those cameras are now clearing.
EY and NY FTS have safed. All vehicles continue to follow nominal trajectories.
So that re-entry burn has concluded. We're expecting the landing burn to begin in about 30 seconds. The entry burn intended to slow the vehicles down significantly as they re-enter the Earth's atmosphere. Amazing tracking cam views of the boosters as they return to landing zone 1 and 2. We can see the grid fins there.
Both side boosters transonic. Stage 2 FTS is saved. Stage 2 is in terminal guidance.
We can see those grid fins steering the boosters for a precise landing. Again, we're attempting
Booster
landing. Landing zone 1 and 2. There we just heard sonic booms. And there you have it. As indicated by the enormous cheers, we have successfully landed both Falcon Heavy side boosters at landing zone 1 and landing zone 2. What an incredible sight.
Nominal parking orbit.
With these 2 side boosters, this marks the 150th and 151st overall successful landing of an orbital class rocket. This is the 21st landing at landing zone 1 and the 4th landing at landing zone 2. And with successful confirmation of our side boosters landing, that will bring today's webcast to a close. We'd like to thank the United States Space Force for entrusting us with today's mission. Thank you to the range and FAA for licensing today's launch. And we'd like to thank all of our viewers for tuning in for an exciting morning. Now, if you're interested, head over to our website and social media platforms for updates on our next missions and milestones. Hope to see you soon. Enjoy the rest of your day.